Hey everyone, and welcome back to Key Safety Talks on YouTube. Today, we're going to be talking about workers' compensation.
Oh, yeah.
Which is something that, you hope you never have to deal with, but understanding it can make a big difference for both employers and employees.
Yeah, absolutely. It's a really complex system, but super important for making sure that everyone involved in, a workplace incident is protected and taken care of.
For sure. And I think it's helpful, before we dive into all the details, of how it works today, to take a step back and look at how things used to be before workers' comp laws came into play.
Oh, yeah, like the Wild West.
The Wild West of workplace injuries.
Exactly.
So tell me a little bit about that.
Well, back then, if you were injured on the job, your only option was to sue your employer.
And I'm guessing that wasn't very easy going up against a big company like that in court.
Right. It was like David and Goliath.
Yeah.
And employers had all sorts of legal defenses they could use to avoid liability.
Like what? Give me some examples.
Yeah. One of the most common was the assumption of risk doctrine, which basically meant that you knew the job was dangerous when you took it, so you accepted the risk of getting hurt.
So if you signed up to work in a coal mine, you were basically on your own if something went wrong.
Pretty much, yeah. And then there was contributory negligence, which was even trickier.
Okay.
Employers could claim that you, the worker, were at least partly responsible for the injury, even if it was just a small mistake.
So even if, like, a piece of equipment was faulty and that caused the injury, they could still try to blame the worker for not noticing it was faulty.
Exactly. And then there was the fellow servant rule.
Okay, what was that one?
This one was a doozy. So imagine you're working on a construction site and a coworker drops a beam and injures you under the fellow servant rule. The employer could argue that they weren't liable because it was your coworker, not the company itself, who caused the injury.
Wow, it seems like the system was really designed to protect the employer and not the worker.
It definitely felt that way. Workers had to fight so hard for any kind of compensation, and even then the outcome was uncertain.
Yeah, it's starting to make sense why the push for workers' comp laws was so strong.
It was a long and difficult battle, but thankfully things started to change in the early 20th century.
Okay.
A big turning point was the Federal Employers' Liability Act of 1908.
What made that act so significant?
Well, this act was groundbreaking because it held railroads accountable for workplace injuries. It got rid of the fellow servant rule for railroad workers and made it easier for them to sue for negligence.
So it was a step towards recognizing that employers have a responsibility to provide a safe working environment.
Absolutely. It set a precedent that would eventually lead to the development of, comprehensive workers' compensation laws.
And when did those laws start to take shape?
Wisconsin was the first state to enact a true workers' compensation law in 1911.
Go.
And that same year, 10 other states followed suit, realizing the need for this type of protection for workers. By 1948, all 48 states and the territories of Alaska and Hawaii had workers' compensation laws in place.
Wow. So in just a few decades, the system went from a system where injured workers were often left to fend for themselves to a nationwide system of protection.
It was a huge transformation, and it wouldn't have happened without the efforts of labor unions, social reformers, and forward-thinking lawmakers who saw how important worker safety and well-being really are.
All right, so now we've got this nationwide system in place. So let's talk about the fundamentals of how workers' comp actually works.
Okay, so at its core, workers' compensation is a no-fault insurance system.
Okay.
Meaning that if you're injured on the job, you're entitled to certain benefits regardless of who's at fault.
So if I trip over my own 2 feet and break a leg at the office, I'm still covered.
Yep. In exchange for providing these benefits, employers gain immunity from most lawsuits related to workplace injuries.
So it's like a trade-off. Employees get guaranteed benefits, and employers get protection from those costly lawsuits.
Yeah, in theory, it sounds like a pretty good deal for everyone.
Sounds good. So what exactly are these benefits that workers' comp actually covers?
Typically, it covers medical expenses related to the injury, so that includes doctor visits, hospital stays, surgery, physical therapy medication, and any medical equipment that you might need.
So the injured worker doesn't have to worry about those huge medical bills piling up.
That's right. And it also helps replace lost wages while the employee is unable to work.
So if I'm out of work for 6 weeks recovering from an injury, I'll still receive a portion of my paycheck.
Exactly. The percentage of your wages that you'll receive varies from state to state, but it's designed to help you stay afloat financially while you recover.
Gotcha. So what about more severe injuries that result in long-term disability?
Workers' comp also provides benefits for permanent disabilities, things like loss of a limb or vision. These benefits are calculated based on the severity of the disability and how it impacts your ability to earn a living.
So it's not just about covering the immediate medical costs. It's about providing long-term support.
Right.
If the injury has lasting effects.
Exactly. It's about recognizing that workplace injuries can have really big consequences, and the system needs to be there to support workers.
Okay, so workers' comp covers medical expenses, lost wages, and even disability benefits. But I'm guessing it doesn't cover every single type of injury or every situation.
You're right, there are certain situations and categories of workers that are exempt from workers' compensation coverage.
Okay, like what? Give me the rundown on these exemptions.
One of the most common exemptions is for domestic workers, things like housekeepers or nannies employed in private homes.
So if I hire someone to come clean my house, they wouldn't be covered by workers' comp.
That's usually the case. It's one of those areas where the line between employee and independent contractor can get blurry.
Okay, so domestic workers are exempt. Any other categories?
Another one is for short-term workers, those hired for a specific project or for less than a certain number of days, which varies by state.
So if I hire someone to come do some repairs on my house for a week, they wouldn't be covered.
Typically not. The idea is that short-term workers are often considered independent contractors rather than employees.
Interesting. It makes you think about all those gig workers out there, like driving for ride-sharing apps. Are they considered employees or contractors? Do they fall under workers' comp?
Yeah, that's a really hot topic right now. And the answer is it depends. The gig economy has made the lines of traditional employment really blurry, and there's a lot of debate about how workers' compensation should apply in these situations.
Yeah, it's definitely a conversation that needs to happen. Okay, so we've got domestic workers, short-term workers. Who else is exempt?
Agricultural workers are also often exempt in many states.
It seems a bit surprising. Farm work could be dangerous.
Oh, it definitely is. And there's been a lot of pushback against this exemption.
Okay.
With advocates arguing that agricultural workers deserve the same protection as any other worker.
Makes sense. Okay, so agricultural workers, domestic workers, short-term workers, any other exemptions?
Yeah, 2 more participants in voluntary carpools are usually exempt during their commute.
So if I carpool to work with a colleague and we get into an accident, we wouldn't be covered by workers' comp.
Not usually, no, because it's not technically considered work-related travel.
Okay, interesting last one.
And finally, this one's pretty rare. Anyone who would otherwise be covered can actually choose to opt out of workers' compensation.
Why would someone do that? It seems like giving up a valuable safety net.
It's not very common, but some people might have other insurance arrangements or believe they have a really low risk of getting injured.
But it's a gamble for sure. All right, so we've got this whole system of workers' compensation designed to protect employees and employers alike. But as we've seen, there are these exemptions and gray areas that can complicate things.
For sure. And it's important to remember that workers' comp is always evolving. New challenges come up, like we talked about with the gig economy, and the system has to adapt
Right.
to make sure it's fair and protects everyone.
All right, so we've covered the basics of what workers' compensation is, how it works, and who it covers. So now let's get into some of the details,
Okay.
especially the financial side of things.
Sounds good. Where do you want to start?
Let's talk about the experience modification rate, or EMR. I've heard this is a big deal for employers, but I'll be honest, it always sounded a bit like a black box to me.
Yeah, it can seem that way at first, but once you understand the logic behind it, it makes a lot of sense.
Okay, well, walk me through it. What is the EMR and why should employers care so much about it?
Think of the EMR like a safety report card for your company, but one with serious financial consequences. It's a number that reflects your company's past safety performance, and it's used to calculate your workers' compensation insurance premiums.
So a good EMR means lower premiums, and a bad EMR means you're going to be paying a lot more.
Exactly. It's a big incentive for companies to really prioritize safety.
Okay, I'm starting to see why it's such a big deal, but how is this magic number actually calculated? What goes into it?
The EMR formula looks kind of complicated at first. Experience modification rate equals adjusted actual losses plus ballast, all divided by expected losses plus ballast.
Hold on, break that down for me. What are adjusted actual losses?
These are basically the costs associated with past workers' comp claims that your company has incurred.
Okay.
But it's not just a simple sum of all your past claims.
There's some fine print involved. Tell me more.
So the formula distinguishes between smaller losses called primary losses and larger, more costly losses called excess losses. And it applies a discount factor to those excess losses, meaning that only a portion of those larger claims actually counts towards your EMR.
So it's trying to be fair and not punish a company too harshly for one really big event.
Exactly. The goal is to get a more balanced and accurate picture of your company's overall safety performance.
That makes sense. Okay, so we've got the adjusted actual losses part of the equation. What about expected losses? Where does that number come from?
This is where it gets industry specific. Every type of business has an expected loss rate based on the inherent risks associated with that industry.
So a construction company would have a higher expected loss rate than, say, an office-based business.
Exactly. And your company's payroll is then multiplied by this expected loss rate to determine your expected losses.
Okay, so higher risk means higher expected losses, which could lead to a higher EMR. And what about that word ballast? What role does that play?
Ballast is a really important part of the formula. It's a fixed number that gets added to both the top and the bottom of the equation.
Okay, but why? What's the point of adding ballast?
It's there to prevent huge swings in your EMR from year to year. So imagine a company has a really good year with no accidents at all, without ballast. Their EMR could plummet to a super low number, but then the next year they have a couple of minor incidents and their EMR skyrockets back up.
So the ballast is like a stabilizer
Right.
to prevent those big fluctuations.
Exactly. It makes the system more stable and predictable.
Okay, so we've got this complex formula taking into account past losses, industry risks, and this ballast to smooth things out. But here's a question. Has this system always been this way? Were there any, criticisms or challenges in the early days of workers' comp?
That's a great question. And, no system is perfect. Workers' compensation has definitely had its share of growing pains and criticisms even from the very start.
Okay, well, tell me more about that. What were some of the main concerns that people had?
One of the biggest criticisms was the level of benefits provided to injured workers. In many cases, workers' compensation benefits were capped at around 2/3 of their usual wages.
That doesn't seem like enough, especially if you're dealing with medical bills on top of everything else.
Exactly. It could create a real financial hardship for those workers and their families.
So workers were getting shortchanged even with workers' comp in place. Any other early criticisms?
Yeah, so the whole point of workers' compensation was to create this no-fault system to prevent lawsuits. But in the early days, there were often loopholes in the laws that lawyers could exploit.
Wait, so employers could still get sued even though the system was supposed to protect them?
It happened more often than you might think.
Wow, that sounds like a headache for everyone involved.
Yeah, it was.
Right. What else? Any other criticisms?
Another concern was the potential for malingering.
Remind me what that means again?
Malingering is when someone pretends to be more injured than they actually are to collect more benefits or stay out of work longer.
I can see how that would be a worry for employers and insurance companies.
It was, and finally, there was a lot of debate about attorney contingency fees.
Refresh my memory on those. How do contingency fees work?
It means that the lawyer only gets paid if they win the case for their client, and they typically take a percentage of the settlement or award as their fee.
Okay, on the surface, that seems fair enough. What was the problem?
Critics argued that this system encouraged lawyers to find loopholes in the workers' comp laws and push for lawsuits, which went against that whole no-fault principle that the system was built on.
It sounds like those early days of workers' comp were a bit of a mixed bag, successes for sure, but also a fair share of bumps along the way.
Definitely. And it makes you wonder if those criticisms are still relevant today or if the system has evolved to address those concerns.
Yeah, that's a great question, and one that I think we should definitely explore in more detail.
I agree.
So,
Let's do it.
yeah.
Let's dig in. Yeah, so let's pick up where we left off talking about some of those early criticisms of workers' comp. And, it's really interesting to see how the system has changed over time.
It really is.
Yeah.
To appreciate the progress that's been made,
Yeah.
but also makes you wonder, are those criticisms still valid today?
Yeah, that's the big question, isn't it?
Yeah.
And I think the answer is it's complicated. Some issues have been addressed and others are still, being debated.
Okay, well, let's unpack that a little bit.
Yeah.
Give you some examples of the criticisms that have been addressed and those that are still kind of simmering out there.
Okay, well, let's take the issue of limited benefits. We talked about how in the early days, workers' comp benefits were often capped at around 2/3 of their usual wages, which could really cause a financial strain.
Yeah.
But over time, a lot of states have increased those benefit levels, and some states even offer benefits that are close to full wages, especially for lower income workers.
Okay, so that's a step in the right direction.
Yeah.
Recognizing that, injured workers need more support to get through those tough times.
Exactly. And then those legal loopholes that allowed employers to get sued, even though the system was supposed to be no fault, a lot of those have been closed as the laws have been updated.
Okay.
So that no fault foundation is much stronger now.
So the system is more robust now,
Right.
providing better protection for both employers and employees.
Yeah.
But I'm guessing that litigation hasn't completely disappeared, right?
Right. You're right. There are still some situations where an employee might sue, particularly in cases of gross negligence, or when an employer intentionally ignores safety regulations.
Okay, so the system is stronger, but not foolproof.
Exactly.
What about malingering? Is that still a big concern for employers?
Well, malingering is always going to be something to think about in any system that provides benefits, but we do have ways to address it, Insurance companies can ask for independent medical exams to verify the claim, to make sure that the injury is real and that the treatment is necessary.
So it's about making sure the system is being used fairly and that resources are going to those who really need them.
Right. And if fraud is found, there can be serious consequences, including legal penalties and loss of benefits.
Yeah, it's a tough balance, between protecting workers and preventing abuse.
It is.
What about those attorney contingency fees? Is that still a hot button issue?
It's definitely still something that people talk about. Some people argue that contingency fees are really important because they give injured workers access to legal representation, especially when they're up against these big corporations.
Yeah, I can see that side of it. Legal battles can be expensive and not everyone can afford those costs up front.
Exactly. But on the other hand, critics argue that contingency fees can actually encourage unnecessary lawsuits, which drives up costs for everyone.
Right.
And they say that it might even lead some lawyers to focus on settlements that make them the most money, even if it's not what's best for the worker.
Right. So it sounds like finding the right balance is key.
It is.
Making sure workers have that legal support without creating these weird incentives within the system.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've seen how workers' comp has evolved, to address some of those early criticisms. So now let's kind of shift gears a bit and talk about the more practical side of things. What role do safety professionals play in managing workers' compensation within their organizations?
Oh, safety professionals are so important when it comes to workers' comp. They're the ones on the front lines working to prevent injuries from happening in the first place.
So their role is about more than just reacting to incidents. It's about creating a culture of safety.
Exactly.
Yeah.
By having strong safety programs, doing those risk assessments, and creating a work environment where everyone is thinking about safety, they're trying to reduce the chances of injuries happening at all.
Right. It's like they say an ounce of prevention is worth a pound of cure.
Exactly.
But of course, accidents still happen. So what happens when an injury does occur?
Well, when an injury happens, safety professionals play a key role in making sure that everything goes smoothly.
Okay, so what does that look like? What are some of their key responsibilities in those situations?
Well, the most important thing is reporting the injury quickly and accurately.
Okay.
The sooner an injury is reported, the faster the injured worker can get the medical attention they need.
So time is of the essence.
Absolutely, because delaying treatment can sometimes make the injury worse, which leads to longer recovery times and higher costs.
Right. Okay, so reporting is key. What else?
They need to make sure that the first report of injury, or FROI, is filled out correctly and submitted on time. This document has all the details about the incident, the type of injury, and other important information.
So why is accuracy so important with the FROI?
Well, any mistakes or missing info in the FROI can cause delays in processing the claim.
Right.
Which means the injured worker has to wait longer for their benefits, and it just creates a lot of headaches for everyone.
So attention to detail is crucial. What else is important for safety professionals when managing these workers' comp claims?
It's also really important to have good relationships with the insurance carrier and the medical providers who are involved.
Right.
Open communication and collaboration between everyone makes the process so much smoother and more efficient.
So it's all about working together to make sure the injured worker gets the best care and support,
Right.
while also navigating this complex system.
Exactly. And that's where a safety professional's expertise is really valuable.
Okay.
They're the ones who can talk to everyone, gather information, and advocate for the injured worker.
It sounds like a multifaceted role.
It is.
Requiring a lot of technical knowledge, but also those people skills and a genuine commitment to the well-being of the workers.
You got it. It can be a tough job, but it's also really rewarding because, you're making a difference in people's lives and helping to create a safer and more supportive workplace.
Okay, speaking of support, I want to talk about something that can be a real game changer in workers' comp return to work programs. What are these programs and why are they so important?
Return to work programs, sometimes called light duty programs, are designed to help injured employees get back to work safely and gradually.
So it's not about rushing someone back to their old job before they're fully recovered.
No, not at all. It's about finding a modified work arrangement that works for their current abilities and restrictions while they're still healing. It recognizes that recovery takes time and that returning to work can actually be a positive part of that process.
Okay, so for example, if someone had a back injury that prevented them from lifting heavy things, their employer might temporarily give them a desk job or something with lighter duties.
Exactly. It's about finding work that allows them to stay engaged, use their skills, and contribute to the team while they're recovering.
So it sounds like a win-win for both the employee and the employer.
It really is. For the employee, it helps them feel more normal and gives them a sense of purpose. Plus, it reduces the financial strain of being out of work and prevents them from feeling isolated from their coworkers.
Yeah, I can see how that would be a big boost for their morale.
Yeah, and for employers, return-to-work programs can really lower their workers' comp costs because by helping employees get back to their full duties sooner, they're reducing how long they have to pay wage replacement benefits, and they're also reducing the chances of long-term disability claims.
Right, it makes sense.
Yeah.
Keeping employees engaged and productive, even in a modified role, benefits everyone.
Yeah, exactly. It also helps keep the workforce stable and avoids the hassle of having to find and train temporary replacements.
Right.
Plus, it shows employees that the employer cares about their well-being.
Okay, so return-to-work programs are clearly valuable, but I imagine there's a right way and a wrong way to implement them. What are some things to keep in mind?
Well, communication is absolutely key.
Okay.
Everyone needs to be on the same page. The employee, the employer, the doctor, and the insurance carrier.
What are some of the key things that need to be communicated?
Well, first, everyone needs to understand the injury, the employee's limitations, and how long it's expected to take them to recover.
Okay.
And then it's about working together to figure out what modified work tasks would be a good fit for the employee and also benefit the company.
So it's about finding that balance
Right.
between what the employee needs and what the company needs.
Exactly. And that often requires creativity, flexibility, and, thinking outside the box.
Okay, so communication is key, figuring out the right tasks. What else?
Starting early is really important. The sooner you start planning for an employee's return to work, the better.
Okay.
Don't wait until they're fully recovered to start thinking about modified duties.
So even while they're still getting treatment, you're having these conversations and getting things ready for them to come back.
Right. It shows the employee that you're invested in their recovery and that you value them as part of the team.
It sends a good message. We're here to support you and we want you back when you're ready.
Exactly. That positive attitude can make a huge difference in their recovery and their overall morale.
Okay, so communication, early intervention, finding the right tasks. What else should employers keep in mind?
It's important to make sure the employee is comfortable and to not push them too hard too soon.
Yeah.
If you rush someone back before they're ready, it can actually backfire and they could get injured again or make the original injury worse.
So patience and understanding are important.
Absolutely. Everyone heals at their own pace.
Right.
And you need to respect that.
So we've been talking a lot about the individual worker's experience with workers' comp. But what about some of those big historical cases that have really shaped how we think about workplace safety and workers' comp?
Yeah, that's a great point. Sometimes looking at specific incidents, especially the ones that had a big impact, can really help us understand the bigger issues and what we've learned from them.
Okay.
What are you thinking of?
Well, the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire immediately comes to mind. It's a tragic event, but also a crucial one in the history of workplace safety in the U.S.
It was.
Can you give us a little background on what happened?
Yeah, so the Triangle Shirtwaist Factory fire happened in New York City in 1911. It was a really terrible industrial disaster. A fire broke out on the 8th floor of the Ash Building, which is where the Triangle Shirtwaist Company, a garment factory, was located.
Yeah, the images are haunting. All those women and girls trapped inside, jumping from windows to escape the flames.
It was a horrific scene. The fire spread so quickly because of all the flammable fabrics and scraps that were piled up all over the factory, and a lot of the exit doors were locked, which was common back then to prevent workers from taking breaks or stealing materials.
Oh, wow. So these women were trapped.
Yeah, tragically, the fire escape collapsed under the weight of all the people trying to get out, and the fire department's ladders weren't tall enough to reach the upper floors. 146 garment workers, most of them young immigrant women, died in the fire.
It's a reminder of how quickly things can go wrong in the workplace, especially when Safety measures are ignored.
It is. The Triangle Shirtwaist factory fire really sparked a lot of anger and demands for change, and it was one of the main reasons that labor laws were reformed all over the country,
Wow.
including the creation of worker safety regulations.
It's so sad to think that so many lives were lost to bring about those changes.
It is, but their sacrifice did lead to important improvements in workplace safety standards, fire codes, and labor laws. It also helped labor unions grow and strengthen the fight for workers' rights, including the right to a safe workplace.
It shows that even in the face of tragedy, positive change is possible. Are there any other historical incidents that come to mind that have had a big impact on worker safety and workers' comp?
Yeah. Another one I think about, although on a much smaller scale, is the case of Ralph Thornton, who worked at the Bethlehem Steel Company in Pennsylvania.
Okay.
In 1910, Thornton was injured on the job because of a faulty crane. He sued the company, but the court dismissed his case.
Why was his case dismissed?
The court said that Thornton had assumed the risk of injury by working in a steel mill.
Wow.
They used that common law defense we talked about earlier.
Right.
So even though Thornton lost his case, it actually helped the movement for workers' compensation laws. It showed how unfair it was to put all the responsibility for safety on the worker and highlighted the need for a system that provided compensation regardless of who was at fault.
So even in defeat, Thornton's case contributed to a bigger win for workers' rights.
Exactly. It helped build momentum for those first workers' comp laws in the U.S. just a year later.
These stories are powerful. You know, they remind us that the fight for worker safety is never really over, and we can't take the progress we've made for granted.
You're absolutely right. There's always room for improvement, and new challenges are always coming up. You know, think about the rise of AI and automation.
Right. How does workers' comp adapt to a world where robots are working alongside humans?
Yeah.
What about the new risks that come with those technologies?
Those are really important questions that we're trying to answer right now. You know, as technology changes and the way we work changes, workers' comp needs to keep up.
Right.
It's an exciting challenge and one that's going to require a lot of collaboration, innovation, and a commitment to making sure that all workers are protected and supported.
So it sounds like workers' comp is entering a new era of evolution, just like it did in the early 1900s.
Yeah, I think you're right. We're at the beginning of a new chapter in the story of workers' comp, one that will be shaped by all these advancements in technology, new ways of working, and a renewed focus on the well-being of workers.
Yeah, it's a fascinating conversation to be having, and I think we should pick up this conversation in our next part.
Sounds good. Let's take a break and come back with some final thoughts and a question to leave you thinking.
Welcome back to Key Safety Talks. We've been talking all about workers' compensation, and it's amazing to see how far we've come in protecting workers.
Yeah, absolutely.
But as we've discussed, there are still some challenges ahead and some new things to figure out.
Right, workers' comp needs to keep changing as the world of work changes. We've talked about the gig economy and automation, but there are other trends too that could have a big impact.
Like what? Give me a sneak peek into the future. What's on your radar?
Well, one thing that's getting a lot of attention is mental health in the workplace.
Yeah.
Workers' comp has traditionally focused on physical injuries, but now people are starting to understand that mental health problems like stress, anxiety, burnout can also be caused by work and can really affect someone's ability to, do their job.
Right. Our jobs can be really stressful, and that stress can affect us both physically and emotionally.
Exactly. And so the question is, how do we include mental health in the workers' compensation system?
Yeah.
How do we figure out if it's really work-related? How do we assess how serious it is? And how do we provide the right support and treatment?
It's a tough one, for sure. And it's not just about mental health.
Yeah.
What about all the people working from home now? How does that affect workers' compensation?
That's another big one, with more people working remotely. The lines between work and personal life are blurred. So it can be hard to say for sure if an injury that happens at home is actually work-related.
So if I trip over my dog while I'm getting a file from my home office, does that count as a workplace injury?
It's a gray area, and it could definitely lead to more disputes and lawsuits.
Right.
We need clearer rules about what counts as a work-related injury when you're working remotely.
Okay, so it seems like technology is a big part of these new challenges.
Yeah.
We talked about automation, but what about wearable technology in the workplace?
Yeah, that's an interesting one. Wearables like fitness trackers and smartwatches can collect tons of data about workers,
Right.
like how they move their heart rate, their sleep patterns, even their stress levels.
Mm-hmm. So employers could use that data to keep track of worker safety and spot potential problems.
They could, but it raises some privacy concerns. Who owns that data? How is it used, and could it be used against a worker if they file a workers' comp claim?
Yeah, it's like opening a can of worms.
It is, and it's just one example of how technology is making us rethink the workers' compensation system.
It sounds like the future of workers' comp depends on how we deal with these complex issues. It's not just about making small changes to the system. We need to completely rethink it for this new world of work.
I agree. We need to be proactive,
Right.
think ahead, and come up with new solutions that are fair and protect all workers.
It's a call to action for everyone involved, policymakers,
Yeah.
employers, workers, and of course, safety professionals.
Yeah, we all have a role to play in shaping the future of workers' compensation.
Well said. It's been a really eye-opening conversation, learning about the past, present, and future of workers' comp.
I've enjoyed it too.
And to everyone watching, we hope you found this deep dive into workers' comp helpful and interesting.
It's a complex topic, but an important one.
Keep learning and keep talking about these issues because worker safety and well-being are everyone's responsibility. Thanks for joining us on Key Safety Talks on YouTube. And until next time, stay safe.